Again, this is one of the main enemies of the false light movement. Communism, Marxism, okay, just like it was with Hitler. Secularism, paganism, Satanism, communism, these are always the opponents of the dominionist and New Age movements. So there's a lot of false light culture war rhetoric that's being discussed in this interview. Child grooming, pedophilia, communism, Marxism, globalism, culture war. Okay, he also mentioned medical tyranny. Okay, this is the kind of rhetoric that is becoming very, very commonplace because these are all aspects of the dark side, the so-called satanic Jezebel Baal side that the false light is rising up against. To go down the rabbit hole is basically to learn about the Zionist Jewish elite plan to control the world. And that's why it's the real Gnostic trap and leads people into Gnosticism. Because what it's ultimately preparing people to do is eventually rise up in Gnostic rebellion along with the beast in his war against Jerusalem, the harlot. In fact, Yuval Noah Harari, who is the top advisor to Klaus Schwab, the main figurehead of the Great Reset, is a Jew. George Soros, who's also a higher up on the Great Reset side, is also a Jew. So this growing movement of exposing Hollywood, run by the Jews, exposing communism, started by a Jew, exposing pedophilia, promoted in ancient Jewish rabbinical texts, exposing the Great Reset, which includes high-ranking Jews, it's exposing the harlot system, and it's building up toward the eventual destruction of the harlot by the beast. Even the QAnon movement, in some of Q's drops, he talked about the Rothschild family, a Jewish family, and how they're the leader of the global satanic cult that's behind this tyrannical agenda. Hey, here's a shot of one of Q's drops. It says, Rothschilds are the cult leaders of the New World Order and worship Satan. So there again is the reference to Satanism. They have worldwide control over banks, financial institutions, and governments. These people are sick and evil. And then you can see George Soros is mentioned there as well. So this is what the Great Awakening is really about. Waking up to the satanic controlling agenda of the Jewish harlot system. And so with this increasing exposure of all this overtly satanic stuff, pedophilia, child sacrifice, communism, tyranny, Satanism, etc., the world is being primed for the arrival of the beast as a counterfeit Christ to take down this satanic, demonic system of the harlot. Remember, the harlot is a dwelling place for demons. So it's going to be a counterfeit Christ taking down a counterfeit beast. And so this pushback against the LGBT agenda and Disney and the idea that it's part of this child grooming agenda to normalize pedophilia, this is all part of the larger false light war. If you remember, the pedophile networks were one of the big things that the QAnon movement has become known for speaking out against. Right? They want to take down the satanic blood-drinking pedophiles. It's really the satanic panic of the 80s on steroids. And now more and more the Christian right is taking up this fight as well because of this idea that the LGBT movement is targeting children, causing them mental illness and trauma, and normalizing pedophilia. Right? They're going after children and want to groom them with their hypersexualized content and education. Like I said, it's the satanic panic of the 80s on steroids. It's a large-scale awakening and pushback against the demonic harlot agenda, the implementation of Babylonian Talmudic principles and communism, which is all Jewish. And that's why we're seeing more and more exposure of Satanism and pedophilia, which is the same stuff that QAnon and the New Age movement have also been very interested in exposing and stopping. Not just in a conceptual way or in a theoretical way, but in a very real and tangible way. I showed this back in my Road to Antichrist series. These are a couple of articles from a website called Exopolitics. It's a New Age truther website run by a man named Michael Salla, who's written many New Age and conspiracy books about ETs and the Galactic Federation, which ties in with what we talked about earlier about how Buzz Lightyear was part of the Galactic Alliance. And that New Ager named Elizabeth April, who astral traveled and met members of the Galactic Alliance who want to liberate our prison planet and so forth. And so here's an article from August of 2019 titled, Epstein murdered to hide satanic pedophile network manipulating global elites. And then here's another one. U.S. Special Forces arrest satanic pedophile group. So here are some very blatant references to satanic pedophilia coming directly from the New Age. This is also the case with Vladimir Putin, who's another major confirmation of the things that I've been talking about on my channel. He's been speaking out against Satanism and pedophilia for many years now. Okay, I'm going to play a clip here. This is a clip from a speech that Putin gave almost 10 years ago, back in 2013, where he explicitly calls out Satanism and pedophilia as being the greatest threats to Western culture.
Мы видим, как многие евроатлантические страны фактически пошли по пути отказа от своих корней, в том числе и от христианских ценностей, составляющих основу западной цивилизации. Отрицаются нравственные начала и любая традиционная идентичность, национальная, культурная, религиозная или даже половая. Проводится политика, ставящая на один уровень многодетную семью и однополое партнерство, веру в Бога или веру в сатану. Эксцессы политкорректности доходят до того, что всерьез говорится о регистрации партий, ставящих своей целью пропаганду педофилии. Люди во многих европейских странах стыдятся и боятся говорить о своей религиозной принадлежности. Праздники отменяют уже. Или называют их как-то по-другому, стыдливо прячут саму суть этого праздника, нравственные основы этих праздников. И эту модель пытаются агрессивно навязывать всему миру. Убежден, это прямой путь к деградации и примитивизации, глубокому демографическому и нравственному кризису. Что еще может быть большим свидетельством морального кризиса человеческого социума, как не утрата способности к самовоспроизводству?
So he was addressing this moral crisis of the West, right? Moral crisis. And how the West's Christian roots are being uprooted by the invasion of homosexuality, gender fluidity, political correctness, pedophilia, and Satanism. Doesn't that basically sum up what the conservative Christian right is talking about today? Everyone is saying how there's a moral crisis plaguing the nation because of the suppression of Christian values, the abandonment of our nation's so-called Christian roots, right? And the invasion of political correctness, gender fluidity, and the increasing normalization of pedophilia and Satanism. Putin explicitly mentioned all those things in this speech. And this is what we're hearing more and more of today, is this lamenting of the downfall of Western values and Western culture. And that's exactly what Putin has been lamenting for a long time now. This is what the Great Awakening is. It's a Gentile revolt to preserve its culture and its values against the Zionist Jew New World Order invasion. That's what Putin's war in the Ukraine is about, going to war against the New World Order. He's a false light type who wants to fight against Satanism, pedophilia, globalism, and the New World Order. Even Jordan Peterson has acknowledged that Putin's anti-woke ideology is one of the main factors behind his war in the Ukraine. Listen to this.
I usually touch on religious issues and then cultural issues pertaining mostly now to the culture war that we seem to be engulfed in, I would say, not only in the West, but in the rest of the world, and which has actually broken out into a real war. I think Putin has weaponized a certain degree of anti-woke sentiment among Russians. And some of that anti-woke doctrine, let's say, which is more conservative, he may also believe. But minimally, he's managed to use it very effectively on the propaganda front. And that's certainly one of the factors that's driving the war and sustaining it and causing it.
Okay, so in 2013, Putin publicly addressed a moral crisis in the West because of the abandonment of Christian values and the advancement of gender fluidity, pedophilia, and Satanism. And then less than 10 years later, he attacks the Ukraine under the pretense of fighting the New World Order. So hopefully we're starting to get a better idea, if we haven't already, about where this growing concern about the spread of Satanism and pedophilia in America is ultimately heading. Okay, it's heading in a militant direction. That's one of the watchwords for postmillennialism and nationalism. Okay, and both NAR and Reformed leaders are using this term militant in reference to the church. Okay, Lance Wallnau said that in the trailer for the series, right? How the church is going to get to a militant level of maturity. The stuff at Disney is not just leading to the normalization of pedophilia. It's leading to something beyond that. And I think Putin is a good picture of where things are ultimately heading as this global freedom movement, this great awakening against communism and Satanism continues to spread. And we move closer and closer to the beginning of the tribulation. With the breaking of the first seal, with a white horse that mimics Christ, which I think is representative of the great awakening, this post-millennial, quote-unquote, Christian crusade to conquer evil, and then the eventual rise of the beast and his war against the harlot and the saints. And speaking of the harlot, here's a very interesting article from the Jerusalem Post from 2013. This is the same year that Putin gave the speech calling out pedophilia and Satanism. And it's titled, Putin, First Soviet Government Was Mostly Jewish. Okay, so this is Putin acknowledging the Jewish identity of the first Soviet government, which he opposes. Okay, and this would make sense, again, because, communism was ultimately a Jewish creation, with Karl Marx being Jewish. That's why Hitler hated communism so much, because he saw it as part of the international Jewish conspiracy to control the world, and he believed that they would eventually create a state to help push this agenda forward, i.e. Israel. And then underneath here it says, Russian president says predominantly Jewish Soviet government was guided by false ideological considerations. And what was really interesting was how Putin said that this Jewish-run Soviet government suppressed the religious freedom of the people, right? Because that's another major part of this false light movement, is how this tyrannical agenda is, suppressing our religious freedoms, and we need to fight to preserve them. So while this may not be outright hatred of Jews coming from Putin, it is a recognition on his part of the negative impacts that Jewish communists have had on his country and how they held false ideological considerations and suppressed people's freedoms. And I think that's significant. And so I have no doubt that there are some elite Jews who are part of some kind of incredibly wicked system that's trying to subdue the rest of the world, to control them. That's why Jerusalem is called Babylon in Revelation, because it's become so incredibly wicked that God has to use the beast system of all things to cleanse it before Christ can come and set up the millennial kingdom. And anyway, so in order to subdue the world, the European West, which is the pinnacle of Gentile civilization, has to decline. And so I think all these things that the false light is exposing and rebelling against are coming from an elite Zionist agenda to subdue the world. And European civilization is the greatest hurdle for a Jewish takeover. I believe that's why things like critical race theory and cultural Marxism have been implemented and have been so effective at making white people feel guilty and bad for being white. I think that's how you tear down the West, is make it feel bad about its history and its heritage, and you introduce things like gender fluidity that completely destroy the family structure and destroy Western values and traditions and freedoms, all these things that make it very powerful, which Putin has been warning are under attack by some kind of satanic pedophile agenda. As Q said in that drop that I read before, the Rothschilds, again, a Jewish family, are the cult leaders of the New World Order and worship Satan, right? And that's the very thing that Putin has been publicly speaking against and is now going to war against. Maybe not very effectively, but the point is still to be taken. And just to further drive home my point about Putin's alignment with the false light Gnostic awakening movement, many of you guys are probably familiar with the news organization Russia Today, popularly known as RT News, which is incredibly conspiracy truther oriented. It's aired stories exposing Bohemian Grove and the Rothschilds, once again, the harlot, the satanic cult. It's had Alex Jones and Stephen Greer on the programs. Jesse Ventura, who's big into conspiracy theory, he has a show, his own show on RT News. And the slogan for RT News is Question More, which is very similar to the Question Everything slogan from the QAnon movement. And RT News is funded by the Russian state. So Putin is very supportive of it. So there's this growing acknowledgement across the world of Satanism and this growing exposure of Satanism within the false light movement. There is a worldwide Jehu movement exposing the global Jezebelic cult of Baal. Whether it's QAnon or the New Age or the Truthers or the NAR or Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin or a bunch of other Christian channels who are just trying to get clicks and don't really know what they're doing. The false light in all its various forms, from all its various angles, is speaking out against this blatant Satanism, which ultimately points back to some kind of Babylonian cultic system that a group of elite Zionist Jews have set up. Then there's the QAnon movement, which has been one of the best examples of the bond between the New Age and conspiracy theory. The whole point of Q's drops has been about exposing the New World Order to the public. One of his earliest drops was about the main families behind the New World Order, the Rothschilds, Soros, and the House of Saud, which he says are the puppet masters. And then at the bottom it says, the New World Order worships Satan, quoting Vladimir Putin. And the clear implication of this illustration is that the Rothschilds, the Zionists, the Jews, Israel, etc., are at the center of the New World Order, just like Alice Bailey said. And that's been the thesis of the Truther movement going back decades.
If all roads led back to an Amazon tribe, or the Irish, or the Swedish, I would be talking about them. But an honest researcher or historian has to admit that there's always a connection to these people.
So all roads don't lead to Rome, according to Alexandra. They lead to Israel and the Jews, which will certainly be the opinion of the Antichrist and his kings. And that's pretty much how every conspiracy researcher presents the New World Order. They'll always feature the Zionists and or the Rothschilds at the top of the food chain. And that's why it's alternatively called the Jew World Order. Now, it's not just the Rothschilds. Other families are mentioned as well, like the Rockefellers and the Morgans and the Carnegies. And remember Daniel's prophecy about the mixing of iron and clay and the beast and the harlot being together for a time. There's a Jewish-Gentile partnership, but the Rothschilds are the main ones. And almost all of the New Age conspiracists that I've talked about have mentioned the Rothschilds as the main architects. David Icke, of course, we've already seen. In The Biggest Secret, references to Rothschild are found on 78 pages, and he talks about them extensively in other books as well. David Wilcock, as you heard before, mentioned him in his interview with Tim Ray and talks about them quite a bit in The Financial Tyranny. And he also mentions the Satan-worshipping Zionists who have been in control of these institutions from behind the scenes, which he talked about with Tim Ray. He mentioned the satanic cult that runs the world. George Humphrey mentions the Rothschilds in his book Life, Love, and Joy. Jordan Sather mentioned them as well when he was talking about the Cabal. Dylan Monroe includes them on his Deep State map. Right up here near the top, it says Rothschild Bank. And then he also includes the First Zionist Congress, which eventually led to the reestablishment of Israel in 1948. Champ Perinia has the Rothschilds on his Great Awakening map, just to the outside of his Q section, right next to pedophiles and child trafficking. It says Clintons and Rothschilds, the global elite. Here's a reference to the Rothschilds in Saucers of the Illuminati by Jim Keefe. Foster Gamble talks about them in Thrive. Here's a page from the official transcript with a few of the mentions of the Rothschilds in the film. Janet Osbard talks about them in Fall of the Cabal. She says the Rothschild family is at the top of the pyramid and owns most of the world. Bill Cooper, in his book Behold the Pale Horse, which New Ager Joshua David Stone acknowledged as the source of much of the information in his chapter on the Illuminati, he mentions the Rothschilds as well. Bill Deagle brings up the Rothschilds in his interview with Project Camelot. Alexandra mentions the Rothschilds all throughout An Inconvenient History, which you heard an example of before. She said that Israel was created with the help of the Rothschilds, which essentially paints God as the demiurge, because the Lord is the one behind the reestablishment of Israel. Q talked about them quite a bit in his drops. It says here 25 posts containing Rothschild, and as I mentioned before, he called them the cult leaders or the church of the New World Order that worships Satan. Once again, the satanic cult that runs the world. And as you can see, he was quoting Vladimir Putin, who's also spoken out not only against the worship of Satan and wokeism, as I've mentioned in previous parts of this series, but the Rothschild family specifically. Here's an article from 2017. Russian state TV promotes the Rothschild conspiracy theory. And I'm sure that Russian state TV is closely monitored and endorsed by Putin himself. It says, how does the Rothschild family struggle to control the world? Russian state-controlled Channel 1 sees no problem in asking this kind of question and illustrating it with this image. Look at the piglets in the image below to see the reach of the Rothschild conspiracy, according to Russian public television. So this is public television, right? This isn't on some fringe conspiracy channel. And the picture that they're talking about, it has all these elements: CIA, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Zionism, etc., feeding from the Rothschild Bank, depicted as the mother of all the piglets. And here's a shot from the Russian station's site where the story was run, and it's got a picture of the late Lord Jacob Rothschild. And as I've talked about before, there's also Russian Today News, RT News, which has been covering conspiracy topics for many years. They've run stories on the Illuminati and Bohemian Grove and interviewed people like Alex Jones and Stephen Greer. And even this woman here who believes that the Pleiadian ETs are going to save humanity from the New World Order. It's a highly conspiracy-oriented station, and it too is Russian. So Russia has been on the cutting edge of conspiracy and New World Order exposure for a long time. And what's interesting about that is that Russia is to the north of Israel. And we talked before about how Daniel 11 says that the Antichrist will be the king of the north. So Russia could very well be a key element of the army from the north that the Lord uses to bring judgment upon Israel. Not just because of its geographical orientation, but also because of its affinity for conspiracy and longtime enmity toward the New World Order, as demonstrated by Vladimir Putin.
Решение о национализации этой библиотеки было принято советским правительством, первым советским правительством, и членами его являлись примерно на 80-85% евреи. Но они же, руководствуясь ложными идеологическими соображениями, шли тогда на аресты и репрессии и иудеев, и православных, и представителей других конфессий, мусульман. Они всех гребли под одну гребенку. И вот эти идеологические шоры и ложные идеологические установки, они, слава Богу, рухнули.
Ротшильды и сделали свое состояние на золоте, точнее на обмене. Сначала монет германских княжеств, а затем постепенно перейдя уже к крупным банковским спекуляциям по всему миру. И, по сути, скупки центральных банков и европейских государств. В 19 веке даже ходила такая шутка: в мире есть несколько империй: Великобритания, Пруссия, Россия и Ротшильды. В результате на сегодня Ротшильды — совладельцы Федеральной резервной системы США, Банка Англии, вот недавний визит туда королевы Елизаветы, десятков крупных банков по всему миру. Это самая богатая и одновременно самая закрытая от посторонних взглядов семья в мире. Еще одно правило Ротшильдов — не разглашать размер своего состояния ни в суде, ни в завещании. Что-что, а это правило не нарушалось никогда. Это характерная современная карикатура. Ротшильды подпитывают и ЦРУ, и английскую разведку Ми-6, и запрещенную в большинстве стран мира террористическую группировку ИГИЛ. Таких влиятельных компаний в сфере средств массовой информации у Ротшильдов множество. Среди них французская газета «Либерасьон», британское издание «Экономист», «Дейли Телеграф», а также общенациональное телевидение Британии BBC.
Разве мы хотим, чтобы в наших школах с начальных классов детям навязывали извращения, которые ведут к деградации и вымиранию? Чтобы им вдалбливали, что кроме женщины и мужчины якобы существуют еще некие гендеры, и предлагали сделать операцию по смене пола. Но разве мы все этого хотим для своей страны и для своих детей? Для нас все это неприемлемо. У нас другое, свое будущее. Повторю, диктатура западных элит направлена против такое полное отрицание человека, ниспровержение веры и традиционных ценностей, подавление свободы приобретает черты религии наоборот, откровенного сатанизма. Откровенного сатанизма.
But the elite in the West, they keep talking of their exceptionalism, of how they are different, and they are the ones creating a sense of disruption between our peoples. They are the ones destroying family values, traditional values that make everyone on this planet human. That is the very reason why today the Ukrainian people are being held hostage. They're being held hostage following a coup, and they are just puppets in a game that is being played by the West.
There is a strong desire among Western elites to freeze the current unjust state of international affairs. For centuries, they have been stuffing their bellies with human flesh and filling their pockets with money. But they must understand that their vampire ball is coming to an end.
The president of Ukraine himself, by the way, is a Jew by nationality.
Просто это люди вообще без всякой веры, такие безбожники. Ведь они, этнические евреи, но кто их видел в синагоге? По-моему, в синагоге их никто не видел.
This is a most blatant violation of human rights, of the rights of the believers. The church is being taken apart, it's being completely torn down, and people around the world seem to like to ignore that, and I think that those who are doing that, they will eventually have their comeuppance. The people who are tearing our church apart are not even atheists, because atheists believe in something. They believe that there is no God. That is their faith. That is what they believe in. But these people that are attacking the church, they're not atheists. These are absolutely faithless people, godless people. Well, ethnically, many of them are Jews, but you haven't seen them visit any synagogue. These are people that have no tribe, that have no family. They do not value things that we value, and they do not value the things that the Ukrainian people values. And when they escape, they will go to get a rest somewhere on a beach. And at some point in the future, the people in Ukraine will remember who did it to them.
Ведут против нас все более агрессивные информационные атаки. Целью выбирают прежде всего, конечно, молодых людей, молодые поколения. И здесь опять лгут постоянно, извращают исторические факты, не прекращают нападки на нашу культуру, на русскую православную церковь, другие традиционные религиозные организации нашей страны. Посмотрите, что они делают со своими собственными народами. Разрушение семьи, культурной и национальной идентичности, извращение, издевательства над детьми вплоть до педофилии объявляются нормой их жизни. А священнослужители, священников принуждают благословлять однополые браки. Да Бог с ними, пускай что хотят, то и делают. Хочется им сказать. Но посмотрите, извините меня, священные писания, главные книги всех других мировых религий. Там все сказано, в том числе то, что семья – это союз мужчины и женщины. Но и эти.
I truly agree with you. Satanism and cult services, sorceries, this is nonsense. That is something that confuses people, brings them to darkness.
I mean, his perspective notwithstanding, what continues to go on as the Western Zionists under the Marxist, fascist, limp-wristed, homosexual crack smoker, the felon in the White House, continues to play chess, completely outmatched, of course, by the statesmanship of Vladimir Putin.
It's always been said that the Jews will eventually hang themselves, and
right.
I believe they will. But of course, they may bring a lot of us down with them. Right now in the Ukraine, of course, the Jews run the Ukraine. It is a Jewish state as such. Putin knows this. He understands that a Zionist banker has been made the new prime minister there, and that Timoshenko has many millions of dollars in secret bank accounts. All of these Jews are, once you find out who's in charge, and of course I've been reading up on a number of these people. There's Igor Kolomoisky. I hope I pronounced that right, a banking investment magnate. They say he's worth over $2 billion. There's Boholyubov. He controls the private bank, Ukraine's largest bank. And all of these Jews, they brought in the Mossad. There's no doubt at all the so-called government snipers who shot the rioters, the demonstrators.
Shot the police too. They shot apparently people on both sides.
They did. Yeah, it's a shame that Russia is being pushed this way. Of course, Russia embarrassed the United States and Israel by preventing their warmongering in Syria and Iran. Israel has been chomping at the bit for us to spill our blood in these two countries.
Always the way it is. American boys and girls go ahead and bleed to death for Israeli and Zionist greed. Vladimir Putin in Russia stopped a greater Middle East war in Syria, stopped a massive attack on Iran, which would have led to an enormous conflagration. So they don't like Putin. And the man really does deserve that Nobel Peace Prize.
He does. It appears to me that the true patriots in the United States are all behind Putin. I mean, we're just vomiting every time we see Obama.
Right. Yeah.
But everybody's saying Putin is our man.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, if he ran for president, I know he would get quite a few votes in the United States.
Oh, I think he'd win.
But why is it that they call him a villain and a thug? You know, the horrible murderous activity of the Soviet Union and the communists that were all Jews. And
they weren't Russians, folks.
No, they sure weren't Russians.
You've got to get that. We've got to hammer that point, Tex, over and over again. The Bolshevik Revolution and those who led the Soviet Union were essentially non-Russian. They were outsiders, and then he converted some insiders. They were all Jews.
That's right. And that's what Putin said last year when he gave a speech to the leading Jews of Russia. He said the 1917 revolution of the communists was because of the ideology of the Jews. And he said that it was basically a Jewish enterprise. Don't you know they must have dropped their teeth when he said that to them? He was saying something that no one in America has the guts to say, that the Jews brought Bolshevik communism, 66 million dead, to the Soviet Union, to Russia. And he told them to their face last year. Putin did.
Yep.
What an amazing speech.
Over 100 million dead because of that in the last century plus. It's something that is amazing to hear come from Putin. Putin is an amazing man. When you think about all the obstacles, he's survived 7 assassination attempts that we in the West know about, maybe another dozen more that we don't know about. Who knows?
Speaking nearly a month ago, President Vladimir Putin at the International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg, Russia, warned the group of international journalists there repeatedly that Europe, the United States, and Russia were drifting towards full-scale war.
We know year by year what's going to happen, and they know we know. It's only you that they tell these fables and you buy it and spread it to the citizens of your countries. Your people do not feel a sense of the impending danger. This is what worries me. How do you not understand that the world is being pulled in an irreversible direction? That is the problem. But they pretend like nothing's going on. I don't even know how to get through to you people anymore.
And the big news is, a month later, almost a month later, after we first reported on it, in mid-June, there has been almost no Western coverage of it at all. And that's exactly what Putin was getting at. Whether you love Putin or hate Putin, if the leader of Russia with thousands of intercontinental ballistic missiles and cruise missiles is telling the West, I don't know how to get through to you, your media is controlled, you're being manipulated, NATO is putting missiles on our borders, we're having to move missiles in, you've overthrown Ukraine, you're on an offensive, you're funding and protecting radical Islam. Do you know what you've done? Do you know what you've done, as he said at the UN, destabilizing the Middle East? Why are you doing this? Where are the sound minds across the political spectrum who should be stopping this? Russia has 3 overseas military bases. You have hundreds. You have your spies inside our country trying to overthrow it. You have your CIA people trying to get into our embassies. You are at war with us. And the average American, the average European, the average Brit is not aware of this.
Another threat that President Obama mentioned was ISIS. Well, who on earth armed them? Who helped to arm the Syrians that were fighting against Assad? Who created the necessary political climate that facilitated this situation? Who pushed for the delivery of arms to the area? Do you really not understand as to who is fighting in Syria?
But the issue of a major world leader saying that we're moving to the brink of war, and it's not in our news, that's the big story. It shows how incredibly controlled things are. I have never been more concerned about what's happening on the planet today. And if we're able to raise the alarm, you, the freedom lovers out there, the people that want to have a civilization, the people that don't want to have war, if we're able to come together, whether we be black, white, old, young, conservative, libertarian, Catholic, Muslim, whatever it is, we cannot continue to have these conflicts. We cannot continue to have this globalist crisis brand where they stir up the problems, exacerbate the crises, and then gain power out of it. Because all the money in the world is going to be worthless if we have a major nuclear war. And that's what the Russian foreign minister and many others say we're going towards. And Putin is now begging with the press to trigger some type of debate and saying, I can't believe how none of this gets through to the people of the West. They just had the British exit, the Brexit successfully. Nationalism and anti-globalism is rising. I have seen the power of the people when we take action. And sure, our elites are decadent. Sure, they're inbred. Sure, they're very, very narcissistic and disconnected. But they will pay attention when we, the people, force the issue. And we are forcing the issue on this, as well as many other issues going on here in the United States and around the world.
But here's what happens. He's an alpha male figure, like Trump, like Putin. It doesn't matter if you like these guys or not. They are alpha males, and what it brings is the conflict with Jezebel.
Well, yeah, in terms of Ukraine and Russia, I haven't really seen so much of that in the news. I'm, of course, pro-Putin. I'm very pro-Russia.
I am also.
Let's go. Yeah. You know, you see that this is just an extension of the United States neocon establishment, New World Order type stuff.
What does Putin say about America's value system?
So he said in a speech when he annexed those 2 breakaway provinces and he annexed the Donbass, he said in a speech that we have totally abandoned traditional values, traditional faith, and that we've actually embraced full-on Satanism. And he's totally right. And
well, it's true. America's embracing Satanism.
Yeah,
but Jesus is alive, and these things are going to pull. It's a movement. God, the devil is a defeated foe. We're not even going to speak any of that into existence. God runs the world, and it's freedom fighters for Christ like us today that are going to stop it right now and say, we got to start here. Each one of us, we are the church.
Support for the war in Ukraine, support for Ukraine's side in the war against Russia, support for a war against Russia in the West is kind of the bottom line issue for the people who run the U.S. government and for the American media. Why? I mean, I guess you could argue about it, but there isn't an argument about it in the United States. There's a position, and anyone who doesn't hold it is attacked and punished. Why? Why is that so important?
Well, the first thing I think we should all do is I think we should all give Putin credit for curing COVID, right? Because when his invasion happened, COVID went away. So
thought about that.
Think about it. It's almost to the day. So we have to give him some credit, at least, for doing that. He may be the bad guy of the world, but at least he cured COVID for everybody, nearly instantly.
Fair.
Thank you, President Putin.
The U.S. took over the Ukrainian government in 2014. They flooded the country with drugs and gave ecstasy tea to people in the Kiev riots, and all the people were used by McCain and Victoria Nuland and Obama and John Kerry to overthrow Yanukovych, who had originally. He was the president of Ukraine, and he said, we're not going to go the way of the European Union. We're going to go the way of Russia because we're a Christian Orthodox country, and we can't accept homosexuality and transgenderism as something that is in clash with our culture, our religion. And Obama and all of them threw Yanukovych out of power after that. And then you started the massive civil war. You had the Nazis come to power, essentially, these tattooed demoniacs, that then began a 9-year genocide of the eastern Ukrainians in Donbass and Lugansk and Donetsk and Crimea. All of those republics declared their independence the moment the coup d'etat occurred and Poroshenko was put in, because they recognized, and they were their language was being outlawed, they were being persecuted, they were being treated like subhumans. So they declared their independence. The Russian military intervention ceased the genocide that the U.S. was facilitating, and it also discovered all of the material evidence of the biochemical labs, 46 labs in Ukraine, many in Georgia, of course, too, and Africa and elsewhere. And these biochemical labs can be directly related to the research that was done and the documents indicating COVID-19 research and development. So I have no doubt that the origin of the COVID-19 actually began in Ukraine, and we've seen all of the George Soros Foundation, the Open Society Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, the US CIA, the USAID, the Department of Defense, the Department of State, of course, all the big pharma companies. Joe Biden, Hunter Biden were all part of a racketeering scheme to defraud and extort and engage in mafia-style thievery. And of course, there's the Chinese connection. I think Ukraine is the gift that keeps on giving, because it not only shows the corruption of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, not only does it show the corruption of the FBI and the Department of Justice by covering this up, not only is it showing on the laptop of Hunter Biden's all of the child pedophilia and all of these documents, as well as other things, it shows enormous corruption within the United States government.
For those raised on a steady diet of mainstream media, the truth about Putin tends to come as a shock. Some say that once you really understand who Putin is and what he's been fighting against, it's enough to make people question everything they've been told and finally wake up. This truth could be the ultimate red pill, the one that challenges the whole narrative. The real question is, just far how down the rabbit hole are you willing to go? Are you ready to uncover what Putin has in store for Schwab, Gates, Soros, and the liberal elite in the US, the ones failed in their coup d'etat? At the international level, the people have a powerful ally in Vladimir Putin, who is determined to haul the cabal into the dock to face justice for their crimes. Putin has always seen through the disguise and recognised the global elite for what they really are: reanimated Nazis, determined to destroy nations from the inside, with policies that entail child sex trafficking, child mutilation, forced transgender education, CRT, and the worship of Satan in all institutions. All so that they can achieve their sick vision of a new world order and global government. If a man can be measured by his enemies, Putin seems to be doing something right. Far-left globalist billionaire George Soros has complained that Putin is thwarting the new world order from fulfilling its agenda. High praise indeed. Before his death, Jacob Rothschild also singled out Putin, complaining bitterly about the Russian president's resolve in kicking the central banking cartel out of Russia and dismantling the New World Order. Besides kicking out Soros and Rothschild, Putin banned GMOs, banned Bill Gates, and then issued an arrest warrant for him, fought cultural Marxism, and built over 15,000 churches during an era when Christianity is in decline in Western nations. He has also encouraged families to have more children, banned transgender propaganda to children, and called out the WF's normalization of paedophilia, declaring it the ultimate destruction of the family, designed to destroy all cultures and national identity. This is the man we're supposed to consider an enemy. The global elite despise Putin because he defies their social agenda. Putin made Russia great again. This is why his approval rating is still over 80%. But he's not finished yet. Putin has long promised to destroy the New World Order, and to do so, he knows the time has come to cut the head off the snake.
The war right now happening between Russia and Ukraine and the West's support of it actually was an extension of Russiagate.
Oh, thank you for saying that.
Because part of one of the unintended consequences of Russiagate, unintended, I think actually intended, but unintended from our perspective because we were so focused on the Trump component, was how it was desensitizing the Democrat Party to hate Russia. If you think about it, Donald Trump was the worst villain ever in the history of the world, according to the Democrat Party. So they needed to have an explanation as to how this guy won. Because, of course, it can't be the fact that they deindustrialized Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, flooded the country with a bunch of illegals, and allowed opioids into the country. There must be another reason. Simultaneously, we know this because the Russia narrative came ex nihilo. It came out of nowhere. And
that's the way it felt. I was completely confused.
And Tulsi is getting to the bottom of it. And I'm not going to pretend to know all the details of what she's working on. And I've been cheering her on, sending her text messages saying, you go, Tulsi, you go. Because it's so wrong what happened to President Trump and so wrong what happened to our country. But when you think about it, it desensitized the entire Democrat Party to then have a very negative view of Russia, even beyond a normative Western view of Russia, as if Donald Trump is an attaché of the Kremlin. And if you hate Trump, you therefore must also hate Putin and Russia. So fast forward to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, you had the entire Democrat Party and the base of the Democrat Party that used to be anti-war, that used to be where the Ben and Jerry's guy was. You had him on your show. It was great. But the rank and file kind of had a subdued response at best to the financing of the Russian-Ukrainian war, largely because of Russiagate, because so many base members of the Democrat Party and the activists were led to believe that Donald Trump only became president because of the assistance of the Kremlin.
So smart. And can I just add one parenthetical note that a lot of them were pro-Russia when it was Soviet.
Correct.
Because the Soviet Union was above all anti-Christian. And then when the country became Orthodox again, it was easy to hate it again.
Yes. And you know this, you helped lead the, I don't want to say even anti-war, just the skepticism from the West viewpoint that why are we sending all this money to Ukraine? Is it good for us? That used to be a left-wing thing. That used to always be driven from the base of the Democrat Party. And from AOC to Elizabeth Warren to Bernie Sanders, they were largely silent on the amount of money that we sent to Ukraine. So why? Is it because they started to love war? No, it's because Putin became an acceptable villain for the Democrat Party. Because they made the archetype of villain and the archetype of Putin and Trump to be kind of one and the same. That all goes back to Russiagate.
I would say the war itself. I mean, I think the Biden administration provoked Russia into it by declaring that Ukraine was going to be part of NATO. That's my interpretation. I think it's true. But even if you don't buy that, we seamlessly moved from no war with Russia into an actual war with Russia, and very few people said anything about it. And I think the reason they didn't is because they had just spent the last 3 years hearing about how Putin was the worst person in the world. He was our main enemy. Not the Chinese, actually. Not the Indians. Not anybody else. No, it was Russia.
Vladimir Putin has banned Satanism. Yeah, I know. You heard it right. He's banned Satanism. Russia has officially banned Satanism, declaring the International Satanist Movement an extremist organization. Look at that. Look at that. Authorities now classify Satanism as a dangerous ideology that justifies evil and aims to dismantle traditional values. Very, very true. Vladimir Putin once claimed the West is controlled by satanic pedophiles. Dang! Here's the interesting thing, guys, that many probably don't know, but Vladimir Putin is a Christian. He considers himself a Christian. He is publicly identified as a Christian. He is involved with the Russian Orthodox Church. So that would mean he's a brother in the faith. If this happens to be true, that would mean he's a brother in the faith. And if he's a brother in the faith, then I love him as a brother in the faith. It doesn't matter what country you are from. That doesn't matter. Those who are in the kingdom are brothers. Hallelujah. It's just evil. Downright evil. Wicked. So, shout out to Russia for banning that extremist cult. Sad. Man, we jump aboard. Hallelujah.
Putin has set his sights on international Satanism and the shadowy influence of Zionists in the West, warning that these forces are corroding civilization from within, pushing it towards a planned total collapse. While the West welcomes Satanists into schools under the banner of liberalism, Moscow sees them as a dangerous threat, an ideology that justifies evil. The Kremlin insists this crackdown is about defending faith, family, and tradition. According to Putin, the message is unmistakable. These groups literally worship the devil, and they are behind open borders, societal collapse, and the rise of pornography and alternative lifestyles in the West. Their ultimate goal, he warns, is the destruction of the family. He's raising the stakes on his warning that the vampire ball is coming to an end, insisting that Western elites have long feasted on human flesh and sacrificed children. Coming up, we expose the Zionist influence machine, behind open borders, moral decay, and the engineered collapse of society. Could there be a hidden link between Zionism and Satanism? The answer may shock you, and it involves the Red Heifers and the Third Temple. We've pulled back the curtain on hidden networks, forbidden ideologies, and the deep cracks running through the heart of our civilization. The question now is simple. Who will stand up? Putin says he will. From bold moves on the international stage to an outspoken defense of faith, family, and tradition, he's cast himself as one of the few willing to resist the forces he sees as corrosive. Whether you view him as a saviour or a strategist, one thing is clear. The battle for our culture has begun.
UK is warning their citizens to get ready for a war with Russia.
The UK is subject to an onslaught of cyber attacks from Russia. And we know that Russian agents are seeking to conduct sabotage and have killed on our shores. But Russia's hard power is growing quickly. The Russian armed forces are now more than 1.1 million strong, consuming more than 7% of GDP and around 40% of government spending. But it's absolutely clear that Russia's hard power is something to fear. But what about Russia's intent to use it? The war in Ukraine and Russia's track record shows Putin's willingness to target neighboring states, including their children and...
So this tells me the international cabal of billionaires always wanted the war with Russia. They started it before 2010. With Ukraine and Russia. They accelerated it in 2014 when they did a coup of the democratically elected president of Ukraine. And then they actually doubled the bombing of the Donbass, doing the one thing that would provoke Russia to invade the Donbass to protect the Russian-speaking natives, which is what they did. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, it wasn't to start a war, it was to end a war. But of course, again, it all goes down to framing. So the first casualty in war is the truth. And so this guy's up there doing what he's told to do, and what he's done his whole career is lie to his own country, his own citizens, about the threat. And so he's there to gin up support for a war that's going to enrich a handful of billionaires and slaughter a bunch of other people.
It is clear to our allies that the risk to NATO and to the UK from Russia is growing. And unless we're able to raise awareness and stimulate the conversation with society about the risks, we can't expect the rest of government, society, and industry to act or bear the costs.
So we've got to keep pushing fear and pro-war propaganda, or else we're never going to get to a war. We got to get to this war by hook or by crook, because the people who control him want it.